Confetti Covered Quicksand, Chapter 2, The Nanny. I quickly moved up from hostess to working in the takeout area, then eventually to a waitress. Cue the Jeffersons theme song. Jake Brenner finally left Pow Pow for college, and I went on with my life, which consisted of much drinking and tomfoolery. I had almost forgotten about him when he called me one day out of the blue and asked me if I would like to come spend the weekend at his parents' house in Santa Barbara the following week. I thought I would have a heart attack. I said yes. The next day I panicked. Santa Barbara was like 2 hours away, and I didn't know how to get there. There was no internet back then. Well, not in my world, at least. And if you think I knew how to read a map, you are mistaken. If you were a girl driving by yourself in a car that would often break down, and you had no bank account, no credit cards, and no family to call, and there were no cell phones back then, it was kind of scary to travel alone. But this was Jake Brenner. I had to go. There was no way I was going to say no. Aside from the traveling alone portion of my worries, I became worried about the social aspect of the whole thing. How would I behave around his parents? I was very uncomfortable around parents. Part 3 of my worries was the fact that I was fat and faulty. I starved myself that next week and exercised every night by running up in the hills behind our duplex. Strangely, I actually looked slimmer after 1 week. I bought a little flannel top from Contempo. Everything was flannel at the time. Grunge was in, of course. That tied right under my boobs. I didn't think about how someone's parents would view that. I was still in that Hollywood mode of dressing to show off your body. I pulled up to his parents' beautiful home on a Friday evening. I took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Jake answered and immediately introduced me to his parents. I squinted my eyes as he kept reiterating that I was really fun. His mother looked uncomfortable and his dad seemed more understanding. He was trying to show his parents that he wasn't serious about me, so they needn't worry. I was clearly not refined or poised. I was not girlfriend material, or, of course, not marriage material. I had on too much makeup, wore inappropriate clothing, and I was basically a hot mess. I was not their kind, and I knew it. I didn't know what to say to them. I hadn't been around parents for years, including my own. His mother looked terrified, but was polite. She showed me to the guest room, which was done in toile wallpaper and had frilly pillows on the bed. We went out to some street fair that night where the band X was playing. There was a mosh pit going on, and I was sure to avoid it. We drank a ton of sangria, which made me have a huge headache the entire next day. He wanted to go bike riding on the boardwalk at the beach that next morning. I panicked. I hadn't ridden a bike since my pink Huffy in the 6th grade. Me on a bike? In the fresh air? Me? Out in the daytime period? I couldn't do it. But I couldn't let him know that. So I wore my neon green stripper bikini top with shorts, and I rode on the crowded beach boardwalk with him. I crashed so many times, I literally crashed into people's legs as they were walking by. The bike was too high for me, so I couldn't maneuver it properly, and I was wobbling around trying to stop the thing with my tippy toes, while making sure my boobs didn't fly out of the bikini top, which they were known to do in those triangle tops. I remember thinking, I can't believe I am here. Is this how normal kids live? This is madness. It was my very first time in a dating situation with a normal guy. A guy who had regular parents, a family home, and an education. I felt in over my head. It was so different from Hollywood guys. You couldn't get much more opposite. My previous love interests had to wipe off their lipstick before making out with me, or our lipstick would clash. They would do things like jump out of the car while it was driving, hang from second-story balconies, smash windows, and then shoot up some heroin after making out with another guy. We would wake up on the floor in a hallway of some building in a heap. You think I'm kidding, I'm actually not. It really was like that. Dating protocol was something I was completely unaware of. I was a lot more comfortable in, of course, the chaotic situations, because that is how I was conditioned. That stuff I could handle. Bike rides and French toile wallpaper scared the shit out of me. I realized on that trip that Jake was actually pretty insecure, and he appeared to be worried about his weight and looks, not unlike a chick. I couldn't really fall for a guy who wasn't ballsy and confident. I was attracted to guys that didn't give a fuck, and he did. I was disappointed, but a bit relieved to be over my huge crush. Journal entry, October 10th, 1993. I am depressed right now because I am at my mother's. She's not here. And the glorious pink bike I rode when I was 10 is on its kickstand right in front of my face. My sister and my mom, so sensitive the two of them, tried selling my pride and joy for a measly $10 at a garage sale. There are so many things wrong with that sentence, and guess what? No one bought the thing. All the better, because now I can sit here and fucking stare at it and reminisce till I cry. Yes, this bike was one of the coolest things I ever owned. Ever. Now I wish it were gone so I wouldn't have to look at it and get upset. My sister just got here. She says she's off drugs, but still, she's not like she used to be. She's very different. First of all, she looks like a completely different person. All that dark hair she had, gone. She has this stringy, damaged orange, non-color hair. The life has been sucked out of it. It looks terrible. She parts it down the middle and she tucks the sides behind her ears. That is something people are doing this year, so I suppose she can get away with it. Anyway, I remember her pot belly and her dark skin. Forget it, she's as thin and as white as a piece of chalk. And I'm not cutting her down because I dislike her. She just really looks like that. Very unhealthy. And she actually looks better now than she did. And she isn't funny anymore either. She used to be so funny. The funniest person I ever met. To this day, when I tell people stories of Becky, they laugh so hard that tears come to their eyes. She just graduated from high school, barely slipping by. My mom didn't make much of a stink for her graduation at all. As a matter of fact, during the ceremony, she said she was tired and wanted to go home and sleep. She didn't hand Becky any flowers, take her to dinner, or even pretend to be proud of her. She just looked depressed. She got her a class ring some months before, so that's why she didn't take her to dinner, I guess. She could have at least given her some flowers, for Pete's sake. Our childhood friend Karen was with us, and she actually went and stole some red carnations from a table to give to Becky, so she would at least have something. I should have brought something. Thank God for Karen. And of course my dad didn't even show up to see her, the bastard. I was still living with Missy, who was a cocktail waitress at a strip bar at that time. Resentment started to build between us around then. She was paying for most everything, the food, the rent, the bills. I was chipping in maybe $200 or $300 a month and then living off her and letting her pay for everything else. I borrowed all of her clothes and her beauty products. I used her phone, I ate her food, and I repaid her by being the one with the car. I drove her everywhere and often picked her up from work in Hollywood and then drove us out to the clubs. Anyway, we started to snap at each other when we were out drinking. She could have been resentful because she had been paying for everything, or it could have been a number of other things, who knows. One night we had a drunken falling out, Hollywood style, which included the standard. Full force kicking of my windshield, and many flying F-bombs. It was a fight we could not recover from. She either told me to get the fuck out of her house, or I told her I was moving out, I can't remember. And then we told each other to fuck off. I got all of my stuff into my car and I drove to my mom's house, and on the way there I thought, shit, where am I going to live now? My mother was completely emotionally cut off from me, and I knew if I asked her if I could stay, she would most likely say no. But I decided to ask her anyway. She had just had a hysterectomy and she was laid up in bed. I proposed to her that I could pay some rent to her and also help her while she was bedridden. She said absolutely not. It would be too much of a stress to have me there, and I'm sure it would have been stressful for her because, yes, I was selfish and I was loud and I was a pain in the ass. But I truly had nowhere else to go. Please, I said, please just let me stay here till I find something else. I'll pay you. I'll help you out. She said no. Again. I stared at her. I wished all of the times she had hurt me in the past that I had just cried instead of becoming angry and full of rage, because then she could have seen how much she affected me. Instead, she only saw me behaving wildly irrational. This time it was a little bit different. I didn't become violent, even though it felt like somebody had poured hot lava through my veins. I was strangely in control. I told her I would be homeless. I had nowhere to sleep that very night. I was like, I'm your daughter. Your daughter. Can I please sleep in your home until I find a place to live, please? She looked up at me from her bed and she told me to get some blankets and sleep in my car. I took a deep breath. Sleep in my car, huh? I looked down at her in her bed and I very calmly said, Can I ask you something? Who do you think's going to be taking care of you when you're old? I saw a splash of fear cross her face. What, do you think Becky is going to be able to take care of you? It's going to be me. So if I were you, I would be careful how you treat me. Then I left. As pissed as I was, I didn't have time to sit there and cry about it. I had to find a place to live, and fast. I racked my brain. Amelia. I will call Amelia. Amelia Davenport was a friend of mine from high school. She was sort of frumpy and could be negative at times, but she was smart, witty, and a great confidant. I called her up and I begged her to get an apartment with me. She said she would like to, but she needed a few months to save up. She still lived with her family, so she asked her mother if I could stay at their place, and her mother agreed. I was so glad someone else's mother had some pity on me. Amelia's mother was a sturdy British woman who owned a clothing store. She paid all of the family bills. Her new husband, who looked sort of like Matt Dillon, was unemployed and living off of her. I loved Matt Dillon, so I tried to distinguish any thoughts of viewing the stepdad as hot. I didn't want to cause any trouble. I moved my duffel bag into their house, which was at the end of a cul-de-sac in Mission Hills in the San Fernando Valley. They had a pool full of what looked like koi fish, but Amelia said that they were just goldfish originally and they kept growing. It was kind of disgusting. Anyway, I stayed at her house for probably 2 or 3 weeks, driving myself to work in Encino while listening to my new Smashing Pumpkins tape over and over. Amelia's mother had some friends in from England who needed a nanny for their toddler, and she recommended me for the job. Sounded exciting, but I knew nothing about children, and they didn't seem to mind. They said they would give me room and board as payment. I could still keep my job at Pow Pow, and the plan was for me to save all of my money for a month or so and then move out with Amelia at the beginning of the new year. I moved straight into the home of these total strangers named Charlotte and George. Charlotte was a character actress and could be considered homely. She was a tiny dark-haired woman with a huge, gnarly, twisted nose, small lips, and beady eyes. And this sounds mean-spirited, but it was true. She played unattractive roles, like Tracy Ullman type of roles. She did not mind being cast as an ugly person. You would think someone so gnarly-looking would actually be really nice and surprise you, but not this person. She was quite negative and angry. She was always complaining about something. Her husband George was short, with a little weight on him. He had blue eyes, red hair, and worked for a bank. Both of them spoke the Queen's English, these tidy British accents that I adored. They had one daughter named Elizabeth, who was 3 years old. She was quite smart, but very bitter and unpleasant. She was incorrigible, just plain sour, with a little British accent and curly red hair. She also had a very pinched and unsightly look to her. She had so many toys and had everything she wanted, but she was awful. Now I realized she was just emulating her mother. I didn't quite know what to do with Elizabeth. I played Peter Pan and Don't Touch the Ground with her, games I had played with my sister. It was kind of nice sometimes. One day I taught her the names of all the gemstones, and she picked them up right away. Emerald, sapphire, ruby. Her little dimpled hand pointed to each one in a catalog that came in the mail. I initially liked the idea of Charlotte and George's. It was a real, live, warm house. They had unlimited food for me to eat, which was like heaven. I always chose the cornflakes with icy cold milk and sugar sprinkled on top. It, for some reason, tasted like a true delicacy. Charlotte often made shepherd's pie, which was like a pie, only it was made with meat, potatoes, peas, and then some mashed potatoes on top. I didn't much care for English cuisine, but I liked that it didn't include many vegetables. Charlotte tried to show me how to make tea one time, and I couldn't get the hang of it. She said I was dreadful at it. Most of the nights I lived there were spent in the guest bedroom, crying over my mother. I was so hurt by her I couldn't get a hold of myself. Charlotte often barged in and asked me what in God's name was wrong and told me to pull myself together. I tried to explain the situation, but I only ended up crying more. She told me, forget about her, move forward. And I nodded, wiping my snot. The situation with Charlotte and George turned sour very quickly. I didn't know the standard rules of good behavior, so my manners were terrible, and I offended them constantly. For one, I didn't know that most people come out and say good night before they go to bed. They were always offended that I just went to bed without the good nights. They were also offended that I didn't come out and watch TV with them or chat with them. I didn't know what to say, and I also thought they wanted their privacy or their family time, but they actually wanted me to be more a part of their family. That just wasn't something I was used to. I just couldn't make myself open up to either of them, and it really was no wonder they didn't like me. It was all new to me, and I was scared I would mess it up. I couldn't talk around them, I couldn't be warm, and they just didn't understand, and they grew to dislike me. So things started to become very strained, eventually blowing up. I felt kind of trapped, and I felt like I had no privacy. The bursting through my bedroom door without knocking was wearing thin on me, and I was becoming irate that they didn't want me going out at night after my job. They wanted me to stay home, and I wanted nothing more than to leave. I kept telling myself, come on, hold out, only a few more months to go. When I first arrived, the terms were that I would take care of the child each day. I worked nights. Then, slowly, they decided I should start housekeeping, which was probably because I wasn't pulling my weight in some way. Charlotte was speechless when she saw my cleaning jobs. She said, who doesn't know how to clean? Don't you see that dirt? But I didn't. I was very messy, and the next thing I knew I was cleaning the place, taking care of Elizabeth with no breaks, nonstop, and I was miserable. I started sneaking out to a Beverly Hills nightclub called Bar One after they went to bed. This guy I met when I was much younger, named Rich Ross, had me on a guest list for the rest of my life. I was sort of a pimp. I had to bring really pretty girls to the club, and in exchange I would get free drinks and dinner and whatever. Rich would get pissed off if I brought girls that were not up to his standards, as in not gorgeous and thin. And God forbid if I ever put on weight myself. He would sit there with his Andy Gibb hair and running shorts. He always looked exactly the same. He would eat his broiled lamb and say, you know, sometimes people think they're fabulous, and they are not. Rich normally called me a bombshell and told me I was fantabulous. But when I started putting on weight, he would avoid me and throw attitude. He bought me many a dinner and drink at the Rainbow in my teenage years, and any time I walked through those doors, I could go sit at his table and order anything I wanted. And I was usually starving, so this came in handy throughout my teen years. And it was also coming in handy in my 20s.